Hello there and welcome back to the studio. It's a brand new day. So what we have here are the outlines for the larger portrait painting that we're working on. So this is going to be a value study. So this is a 12 by 12 inch panel that we're going to be painting on. So the purpose here is going to be to study the large value arrangement of this painting. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up a value scale on my palette. So I'm using just titanium white, and I'm actually using a different black just to try it out. I'm using lamp black. Go ahead and write down in the comments below how you feel about lamp black versus ivory black. I'm just trying it out because a friend of mine gave it to me. So I used it a couple times in some of my studio paintings, and I noticed it got pretty much as dark as ivory black. I didn't notice too many differences. So if you're more experienced with lamp black, you can go ahead and comment down in the comment section below. So what I want to do is just have a pretty strong idea of how I want the value arrangement to work. So I'm actually going to add a little more titanium white. I'm also using a different titanium white, which is also another tube of paint that someone gave to me. It's a Lukas Studio. So I'm just trying out a few different materials here. So I think that's about good for the value scale on the palette. This is also going to be kind of a paint handling video, I think. So let's go ahead and take a look at the large values now. So if you're a beginner to oil paint, I would suggest doing several studies such as this one. So we're going to look at the large regions of value in comparison to one another. So that's going to be somewhat of an idea of a background color. So I'm going to switch brushes now to put in a darker shape. So we're just going to be comparing these two shapes side by side to one another, and this is kind of the way that I go about doing color studies as well. So again, the idea here is not to make a finished picture. The idea here is to basically get an understanding of the large arrangement of values. And I think working with the values side by side next to one another, I think I'm going to go ahead and get a larger brush here for these darker shapes. So I have a larger brush now for the darker shapes. Not using straight black, but something pretty close to it, and you can see right on your screen the value scale. So I want to just take a look at the large value arrangement. So let's go ahead and get something down for the face. The face is going to be one of the lightest areas in terms of the value arrangement. Now remember, we're not trying to make a finished painting, and if anything, we're really trying to get an understanding of how these values are going to fit amongst each other and get acclimated to working with oil paint. So when you see something like this, for instance, see how it's kind of, I don't know, foggy? That just means that the paint is drying out. So I mean, not literally drying, but the paint could have a little bit of medium. So what I'm going to use is a Neo McGilp. You probably can't really read it. It's a gel-like medium. So I'll just go ahead and write down on the bottom here how it's spelled. So now you can see that the paint is much more fluid. And you can even see that it almost even looks darker. So that might be too dark, but it's okay to push the contrast between the shapes, especially when you're trying to get an idea of the large arrangement of the values. So I'm going to add a little bit of medium to the background brush. So I'm wondering if I want to push the background lighter or darker. So I'm thinking I might want to push the background a little bit darker than what you're seeing on the photo reference. And again, if you want to know, if you didn't watch the previous videos, if you want to know how to draw a simple block in like this, now I know it's not perfect, but if you want to know how to draw a simple block in like what we have underneath, you can go ahead and look in the previous videos that I uploaded. I think I uploaded the start of that larger painting that this is a study for last week. So yeah, I think I'm starting to push the background a little bit darker. Now the face is really, really bright. Not sure if it's too bright, so let's get straight white. Now this is one of the advantages of the value study. We can do things like this that we wouldn't want to do normally on a painting that you would want to develop. So that is extremely bright. So that means that we're not in danger of going too light. So let's do the same kind of thing with the darkest dark, just to make sure that we're not too dark yet. And the area in question is here. See that? We still have a little bit of room to go with the darkest dark. So now we're going to move on to the areas down here. So I'm going to get the darker brush, pretty much just unify these dark shapes here, meaning just combining, just grouping these darks with one another. And let's go ahead and put in very quickly a little shape here for the shadow, just like we did with the video, showing us how to, or showing how I blocked in with charcoal the clothing. Doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so now we're going to put in another value for the shirt. Now the shirt's going to be lighter than the background, obviously, but it's going to be darker than the face. So let's see, might want to use a different brush for that. So when you're doing a value study, the process will go a little bit faster if you have a bunch of brushes readily available. Don't worry too much about the drawing. Now I usually never say that, but in this case I'm going to say it. Don't worry too much about the drawing. Just focus on studying these large shapes in relation to one another. And this is also going to be another compositional tool for once we get into the actual painting. Now the reason I've never created one of these for my portrait painting tutorials, if you refer to my older videos, the reason I didn't really do this is because those videos were standard head and shoulders. So for the majority of those videos, a value study would be just this, and it would have been just incredibly, I think, mundane. And here we have a whole bunch of other elements that we have to work with. So this really does necessitate the usage of a value study. And I may or may not film it. Let me know if you would like me to film the color study. I'm probably going to do a color study similar to this, where we learn how to, well, where we focus on the actual mixtures of the colors. But I think it's more important right now to get an idea of these large values. So I'm pushing the background a little bit darker. So we're going to be messing around with these large shapes in relation to one another. Now the hand is pretty bright, but it's not as bright as the portrait. It's not receiving as much light. But I do want it to be a little brighter than that. And there is a little bit of a value, I mean not much, just that, a little bit of a dark shape that we could put in there for the shadow. Don't need much. And again, just working each of the shapes side by side. This isn't really an approach that I would want to use if I were to want to continue this painting, but it's an extremely useful way to get acclimated to the oil paint as well. So for instance, I'm using a little more Neo McGilp medium. So now with the shirt, I have a feeling that this region here is going to need to get a little darker. And of course this shadow here needs to come down a little further. Notice how I kind of grouped the hands together, sorry, the arms together in one. Here we can differentiate them a little bit. So let's go ahead and switch back to the shirt value. Now for the jeans, I'm going to use another brush yet again. So for the jeans, I'm going to put in a very dark value. It's going to be darker than the sweater or the shirt, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be darker than the sweater, but it's going to be, you know what, it's going to be very close to the background. And I might even think that the jeans are going to be darker than the background. I don't know. But see, this is why it's important to do the value study. I feel like I keep repeating the same thing. I'm sorry if I keep repeating the same thing. So let's just, again, just bounce our eyes back and forth between these shapes. So for the chair, that's going to be another interesting compositional element. The chair is actually lighter than the portrait. So let's play around with the idea of making it really bright, but not straight white. And that should be enough for the light. These value studies are actually a lot of fun. So as we move down here, I'm noticing that it looks a little bit darker. I use again a little more Neo McGilp. So it's a little bit darker. And then down here, there's going to be a little plane change. So it's going to get even darker. Same thing over here, little plane change. Quick and simple. Now in the transfer drawing, or in the drawing that we started for the final painting, I didn't really put much information for the chair, so this is going to be a great opportunity to get acclimated to how much information I feel comfortable putting in for the chair. And I guess we can put this little light. Not sure if it's visible on my camera down here. So for these little inside shapes for the chair, I'm actually going to just fill in with the background tone, maybe even a little bit darker. Yeah, I think just about like this. And then I'll go ahead and put the lights back on. Doesn't have to be too neat. Remember, the objective is not to make a pretty picture. The objective is to get acclimated to the large value arrangement. All right, so I'm going to add a little more Neo McGilp to this brush here with the lighter value. We're going to go ahead and put these light shapes back in. One there, another here, and another there. And over here, I'm not sure. I feel like this value, now that we have all of the values out on the table, I feel like this value needs to be a little bit lighter than this value. But again, it's not straight white either. And then of course the halftone needs to get a little bit lighter. So I guess a little more light over here. So I raised the light sensitivity on my camera, so hopefully you'll be able to see these values a little more clearly. So now I want to differentiate the value for the sweater from the background. I feel like they're a little too similar. So let's see, I think that's all right. So I'm gonna go ahead and make the sweater a little bit lighter now. Now back to the dark shape for the hair. Let's go ahead and push the hair a little bit. Now that's pretty dark, so I'm going to be kind of exaggerating the dark just to see if I can push the light effect a little bit. I'm going to do the same kind of thing to the cast shadow, but not quite as dark as the hair. Really trying to push the effect of light. And I feel like the jeans are probably going to need a little bit more light now. Now, one thing that is missing, I think, in the composition that we have right now is a cast shadow. So let's go ahead and put a little shape here for the cast shadow that we're observing. Let's go ahead and make this whole shape here a little bit darker. So now we have a cast shadow, shadow being casted from the chair. Now let's go ahead and add the light on the chair over here back. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now this little leg for the chair needs to, I think it's a little darker, but there's also a little shadow here, so let's put that shadow. Again, let's just push this dark. So let's mix up a little halftone. Now I'm going to push the difference between the cast shadow on the background and the cast shadow on the shirt. So this one shouldn't be quite as dark. And this is not at all what the final painting is going to look like. Trust me on that. But the only information that I'm going to obtain from this study is basically the value range for the large picture. But in terms of the drawing, I mean, none of this is really that accurate. So I'm going to play around with the idea of a gradient of light for the background. So I'm going to go ahead and take the background brush again and just make this little region a little bit darker right next to the cast shadow, but not too dark. And by gradient, I mean progressively getting lighter and then darker, but still maintaining this cast shadow. You know what? It should be a little darker under the chair. Hopefully you can see that. That shape for the hand. I don't want to do any kind of modeling. I'm very tempted to put in a little halftone for that, but nope. Need to not put any detail. The value study need not any detail. So now for the gradient, the light part of the gradient. So let's go ahead and push this lighter over here. I'm going to try to get a sense of atmosphere in these abstract shapes. Let's push it even lighter still, right on the corner. I may not use an effect like this for the final painting, but at least I can test it out here. And I think that's going to conclude the large value arrangement for this painting. So let me know what you think about that gradient. I don't know, I kind of like it, but part of this is actually glare. So I'm sorry, the painting is kind of glaring. Let me see if I can fix that really quickly. Nope, not really. But just let me know what you think about the gradient in the background. And again, I really recommend this practice. This is more of a practice exercise, especially to those of you that are beginners in oil painting. Just having the sense of not really having to worry too much about creating a perfect image or trying to just make something that's aesthetically appealing. I think sometimes it's really useful to just take something as an exercise in your large value arrangement and pretty much in your paint handling. So the last thing I'll note is that I have my lightest light right here on the chair, and my darkest dark will be right here on the corner of the side of the face. So even though the camera probably will flatten out those value changes, I think it's going to be important just to have an idea of the entire value range.